Hi friends, welcome back. I'm Christina, the manager of the Pacific Beach Library. Today is day 7 of our read along together of Wuthering Heights by Emily Brontë. It's good stuff. This has been an amazing week. I didn't remember that it goes so fast into the wonderful mode. So yay, that's a good sign of a good book. When within a day or two, you're just already just so caught up in it and happy. Or at least I am. I don't know if the characters in our book are happy, but I am. And I hope you are too. I hope you're enjoying this one. I really feel like this is one of those books that qualifies under what they call a propulsive read, where it just I want to keep reading and finding out what happens next because it's just moving so well. Okay, sorry. The tea I'm making for myself today is the James Bond loose leaf tea. And if you're wondering why I'm having the James Bond tea again, it's because the voting for which film we're going to show at the conclusion of our read along together, which now the date has moved over to Wednesday, 5/27, May 27th for our screening. We are going to show the 1970 film adaptation starring, I don't remember her name, Anna Calder Marshall as Cathy, and Timothy Dalton, one of the James Bondses, as Heathcliff. So, in honor of that, today I drink James Bond tea. It is neither shaken nor stirred, I should say. Just poured. Delicious. And I was noticing the other day too, and yeah, I can see it in there too. They don't, when I was comparing the ingredients to the flavors, I can see a sliver of almond in there. I can taste the almond flavor, but they do not mention it in the ingredients. So that might be their secret ingredient is almond, dried almond. Okay, let's go now that we've already we've talked about what film we're gonna show. I'll post a link to it later on. You can sign up for it. I don't actually have the login information yet for how you screen. But if you want to go ahead and sign up to watch the film now, once I get that login information, I'll send it out to everyone who's registered to watch the film through our calendar. So I can go ahead and post that up. Let's see. What happened in yesterday's reading was intense. We read 2 chapters, chapters 11 and 12. Chapter 11 started out quietly enough. Ellen Dean, decided to go walk back over to Wuthering Heights. And on the way there, she saw Hareton, the child of Hindley, and she was excited to see him. But he did not remember her at all. And in fact, he was showing signs of becoming rather coarse, much like Heathcliff had been back in the day, because Heathcliff is teaching young Hareton curse words and to curse out his father and things like that. So we know that Heathcliff is sowing a few seeds of enmity between father and son, which were already very likely to be planted there because Hindley was, so neglectful of his child already. Like we saw him almost drop Hareton off from the stair top. So problems brewing at Wuthering Heights. No surprise there. Then the story continues with Nellie going back to Thrushcross Grange and observing Heathcliff encountering Isabella Linton. And now he had heard earlier in the previous day's reading that Isabella Linton had feelings for him, and he'd sort of why would I want her? And in fact, I forgot to point it out, he had said a rather terrible thing, which was that, why would he want some milk-faced, is that what he called her? He said her waxen, mawkish face. He said if he had to live with her, he would treat her in a very ghoulish fashion. And he said, you'd hear of odd things if I lived alone with that mawkish, waxen face. The most ordinary would be painting on its white the colors of the rainbow and turning the blue eyes black every day or two because they look so much like Edgar Linton's eyes. And so he casually tells Cathy basically that if he had to live with Isabella, he wouldn't be able to look at her face and he would beat her and bruise her as much as he could. So again, Heathcliff, not a nice man in many, many ways. That said, he encounters Isabella. She does not know these things that she said. She wants to believe that he is a good man and that he is, again, it's that whole bad boy idea that he just needs the love of a good woman like Isabella to transform Heathcliff into something better. No. He sees Isabella out there and they talk, and Nellie sees them talking, and she sees him basically share a kiss with her, and it's rather shocking. When he comes in, Catherine had just come by when Nellie was like, oh, can you believe he's doing that? And so Catherine now knows about the encounter between Heathcliff and Isabella. And when Heathcliff does come in, she basically says, what are you doing? you know, you have no cause to do this. This is terrible. And it's like, well, do you think your husband would let me marry her? It's like, that's not the point. You don't actually love her. You don't want to marry her. Like, you don't even like her. It's like, why are you doing this? And the two of them actually start arguing. Nellie can't take the fight, so she runs over and tells Mr. Linton. Nellie, in case you haven't gotten it, is rather a gossip. And this is why we're getting a good story out of her, but she is also making trouble too. She's fanning the flames. And so Nellie goes over, she tells Mr. Linton, you know, Heathcliff and your wife are arguing in the kitchen, and it's because he was trying to kiss your sister and blah, 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 blah. Mr. Linton gets all upset. He comes in, he hears Heathcliff and Cathy arguing with each other, and he's just like, why are you putting up with this kind of trash from him? Like, what's going on? It's like, you need to, this can't last anymore. You need to leave, Heathcliff. You could never come back, and I'm going to go get some servants to help me get rid of you. And Cathy is like, oh no, if that's what you're going to do, if you're going to get rid of him, you get rid of him yourself. She takes the key, she locks them in, she throws the key in the fire so Edgar can't escape, and she says, if you want to get rid of him, do it yourself. Be a man enough to do it yourself. And Edgar turns pale, he starts trembling, and she's like, I knew it. I knew it. You're not strong enough to do this kind of stuff. And Heathcliff is like, look at what you married. This is what you chose over me, this weakling, this wimp. And it's like, you know, why would you, this milk-blooded coward. And so it's brutal. Edgar does get one punch in. He does manage to briefly wound Heathcliff, but then he runs away to get the servants to help get rid of Heathcliff altogether. And it's interesting too, because Cathy believes that she was just on the verge of convincing Heathcliff to give up his plan of revenging himself through romancing Isabella. But because Edgar interrupted the way he did, because things blew up, and because she herself got frustrated that her husband was thinking ill of her when she's like, I'm trying to defend you and your family, and I'm trying to protect your sister from Heathcliff, and you're upset at me, so everyone's upset at each other at this point now. It's vicious. So she goes and she separates from her husband for a moment. She decides to go upstairs, and she says, on the way, she tells Nellie, I'm going to pretend to be crazy. I'm going to have a fit. Because you know I was sick before and I'm not supposed to allow myself to get too upset and everything. I'm going to go kind of crazy. And when I do, you need to warn him too that, you know, I'm not supposed to be agitated, and you need to tell him. And Nellie is just like, yeah, right. If you can tell me cold-bloodedly that you're going to plan to have a fit and plan to be agitated, then you can plan to be calm. So Nellie doesn't warn Edgar that she's planning this kind of thing, nor does she warn him that that there is a danger of it happening genuinely. So Cathy then has a fit. She looks like she's dying. She's actually banging her own head against the chair. It's really weird. I'm wondering if they're going to depict that in the film, because that would be, I don't know how they would not make it just look absurd, but apparently she does. And then she hears Nellie saying to him, because he's horrified and worried for his wife, whom he loves dearly, she tells him, oh, sorry, by the way, I should mention, when he'd first come back up to speak to her after Heathcliff had finally left, he basically tells her, you need to choose between me or Heathcliff. Like, I can't put up with this anymore. And she's upset about the whole thing, and that's when she has her fit. So she has her fit. She then locks herself in her room for a couple days. She will not come out. She will not feed herself. And Edgar is trying to be stoic and not give in to her, and so he goes to his library where he sits in front of his books and he doesn't read. What a waste. And then he's just really so in such turmoil he can't even read. We know it's serious then, don't we, friends? Isabella, meanwhile, is crying and walking around the grounds, and like they don't know what's going on with her, and everything is getting a little weird. And then finally Nellie sees Cathy again. Cathy opens the door. She gets a little bit of food and nourishment, but then she's like, oh, tell me, is my husband totally distraught? Is Edgar just like wanting to apologize? Like, what's going on with Edgar? It's like, he's sitting in his library and he's reading with his books. And she's like, what? He's not caring about me. He's not caring that I'm hurt. And it's like, what is happening? And so she gets more and more upset. She also believes she sees a ghost. And Nellie tries to convince her she's just seeing her own face in the mirror, but Cathy is frightened and she believes she's seen a ghost. There is a bit of ghostly stuff in this book too, so just kind of keep that in mind, that this is we've already seen the ghost of Cathy perhaps visiting at Wuthering Heights when Lockwood was there. Now we're having Cathy seeing her own face as a ghost that she can't recognize as herself. So interesting. Cathy, we gradually realize, is genuinely ill. She's not just faking it anymore. Whether it started that way, doesn't matter at this point. She is genuinely ill. She's a bit demented in her head. She is not in her right mind. And she's also like, she keeps wanting to have the window open so she can feel the wind and feel the breezes off the moors. And she's lamenting, like, why am I here in this house? Why am I in Thrushcross Grange? And she even says, basically, she had a moment where she thought she was back in that moment when her father had just died, and she was at Wuthering Heights, and she was a girl, and Heathcliff hadn't left yet, and she sort of woke up, and she's in Thrushcross Grange. She's not where she belongs. She's not at Wuthering Heights. She's not who she is genuinely. She is wearing this other skin, basically. And she says it's like a nightmare when she realizes she's in Thrushcross Grange as Mrs. Linton instead of Catherine Earnshaw at Wuthering Heights. So whether, again, this is the madness speaking or her own genuine heart, it's hard to say. Finally, Mr. Linton kind of like, what's going on up there? He finally shows up, and he gets upset at Nellie, of all things. And he basically says, why didn't you tell me? And it's like, well, I thought she was faking. Why didn't you tell me she was starving herself? Why didn't you tell me anything? It's like, honestly, Edgar, why didn't you check on your own wife? You live in the same house with her. So that's my thoughts. But Edgar was blaming Nellie. So then it gets, it was such a dramatic chapter. Sorry. A lot of great stuff. He basically tells Nellie, I desire no further advice from you. I don't want you telling me tales anymore. I don't want you doing anything. And she's like, wait, so you're saying if Heathcliff comes back, you don't want me to tell you? If they're meeting up, I don't want to hear anything from you anymore. If you want to tell me more tales, I'm going to kick you out. It's like, woo! Edgar's finally growing a spine, but he's exhibiting it against the wrong person. So they call the doctor in. They're trying to get help. And what they find is that as Nellie is leaving to find the doctor, she sees Isabella Linton's dog tied up. Not quite dead, but tied up in a not good way. She releases the dog, and she just has a bad feeling about this because the dog doesn't run back towards the house where she thinks Isabella should be. He tries to run towards the road. And so later on, we find out from some others, that somebody's heard from, one of the other servants heard from somebody in the village that Isabella Linton had escaped. She'd run away from Thrushcross Grange with her, with Heathcliff. And so she's absconded. She's run off with Heathcliff. Very, very scandalous, especially for the time. Oh, sorry, one more thing too. I wanted to say, I want to go back and just say one more quick thing because it's really important. When Edgar came in and was talking to Cathy, she says a few things to him that are significant. She says to her husband, you're finally come, and she says, you're finally here, Edgar, but she says, you are one of those things that are ever found when least wanted, and when you are wanted, never. And so again, she had wanted him earlier. She had wanted him to miss her. She had wanted him to care. But by the time he finally showed up, she was like, I'm so over you. You weren't there when I needed you. And so that's my interpretation of what she's saying. And then she also says too, he says, am I nothing to you anymore? Do you love that wretch? Do you love that Heathcliff? And she cuts him off and she says, hush. You mentioned that name and I end it instantly by springing from the window. It's like, I'd rather kill myself than have to talk about this with you again. And then she says, as he's holding on to her, she says, what you touch at present, you may have, but my soul will be on that hilltop before you lay hands on me again. I don't want you, Edgar. I'm past wanting you. Return to your books. I'm glad you possess a consolation, for all you had in me is gone. So again, whether it's the madness or whether it's her truth, it's hard to say. So that was an amazing chapter. We had Cathy almost dying, perhaps going mad, maybe revealing like the relationship between she and Edgar is completely broken. We'll see. But meanwhile, Isabella starting a new life with Heathcliff. Can it possibly go well? Is there any chance that that can go well? Let's find out in today's readings, chapters 13 and 14 of Wuthering Heights by Emily Brontë. Chapter 13. For 2 months, the fugitives remained absent. In those 2 months, Mrs. Linton encountered and conquered the worst shock of what was denominated a brain fever. No mother could have nursed an only child more devotedly than Edgar tended her. Day and night, he was watching and patiently enduring all the annoyances that irritable nerves and a shaken reason could inflict. And though Kenneth remarked that what he saved from the grave would only recompense his care by forming the source of constant future anxiety, in fact, that his health and strength were being sacrificed to preserve a mere ruin of humanity, he knew no limits in gratitude and joy when Catherine's life was declared out of danger, and hour after hour he would sit beside her, tracing the gradual return to bodily health and flattering his too sanguine hopes with the illusion that her mind would settle back to its right balance also, and she would soon be entirely her former self. The first time she left her chamber was at the commencement of the following March. Mr. Linton had put on her pillow, in the morning, a handful of golden crocuses. Her eye, long stranger to any gleam of pleasure, caught them in waking, and shone delighted as she gathered them eagerly together. "These are the earliest flowers at the Heights," she exclaimed. "They remind me of soft thaw winds and warm sunshine and nearly melted snow. Edgar, is there not a south wind, and is not the snow almost gone?" "The snow is quite gone down here, darling," replied her husband, "and I only saw 2 white spots on the whole range of moors. The sky is blue, and the larks are singing, and the becks and brooks are all brimful. Catherine, last spring at this time, I was longing to have you under this roof. Now I wish you were a mile or 2 up those hills. The air blows so sweetly, I feel that it would cure you." "I shall never be there, but once more," said the invalid, "and then you'll leave me, and I shall remain forever. Next spring, you'll long again to have me under this roof, and you'll look back and think you were happy today." Linton lavished on her the kindest caresses and tried to cheer her by the fondest words, but, vaguely regarding the flowers, she let the tears collect on her lashes and stream down her cheeks unheeding. We knew she was really better, and therefore decided that long confinement to a single place produced much of this despondency, and it might be partially removed by a change of scene. The master told me to light a fire in the many weeks deserted parlor, and to set an easy chair in the sunshine by the window. And then he brought her down, and she sat a long while enjoying the genial heat, and, as we expected, revived by the objects round her, which, though familiar, were free from the dreary associations invested with her hated sick chamber. By evening, she seemed greatly exhausted, yet no arguments could persuade her to return to that apartment, and I had to arrange the parlor sofa for her bed, till another room could be prepared. To obviate the fatigue of mounting and descending the stairs, we fitted up this, where you lie at present, on the same floor with the parlor, and she was soon strong enough to move from one to the other, leaning on Edgar's arm. Ah, I thought myself, she might recover, so waited on as she was. And there was double cause to desire it, for on her existence depended that of another. We cherished the hope that in a little while Mr. Linton's heart would be gladdened, and his hands secured from a stranger's gripe by the birth of an heir. I should mention that Isabella sent to her brother, some 6 weeks from her departure, a short note, announcing her marriage with Heathcliff. It appeared dry and cold, but at the bottom was dotted in with pencil an obscure apology and an entreaty for kind remembrance and reconciliation, if her proceeding had offended him, asserting that she could not help it then, and being done, she had no power to repeal it. Linton did not reply to this, I believe, and in a fortnight more I got a long letter which I considered odd, coming from the pen of a bride just out of the honeymoon. I'll read it, for I keep it yet. Any relic of the dead is precious, if they were valued living. Dear Ellen, it begins. I came last night to Wuthering Heights, and heard, for the first time, that Catherine has been, and is yet, very ill. I must not write to her, I suppose, and my brother is either too angry or too distressed to answer what I send him. Still, I must write to somebody, and the only choice left me is you. Inform Edgar that I'd give the world to see his face again, that my heart returned to Thrushcross Grange in 24 hours after I left it, and is there, at this moment, full of warm feelings for him and Catherine. I can't follow it, though. Those words are underlined. They need not expect me, and they may draw what conclusions they please, taking care, however, to lay nothing at the door of my weak will or deficient affection. The remainder of the letter is for yourself alone. I want to ask you 2 questions. The first is, how did you contrive to preserve the common sympathies of human nature when you resided here? I cannot recognize any sentiment which those around share with me. The second question I have great interest in, it is this. Is Mr. Heathcliff a man? If so, is he mad? And if not, is he a devil? I shan't tell my reasons for making this inquiry, but I beseech you to explain, if you can, what I have married. That is, when you call to see me, and you must call, Ellen, very soon. Don't write, but come, and bring me something from Edgar. Now, you shall hear how I have been received in my new home, as I am led to imagine the Heights will be. It is to amuse myself that I dwell on such subjects as the lack of external comforts. They never occupy my thoughts, except at the moment when I miss them. I should laugh and dance for joy if I found their absence was the total of my miseries and the rest was an unnatural dream. The sun set behind the grange as we turned onto the moors. By that I judged it to be 6 o'clock, and my companion halted half an hour to inspect the park and the gardens and probably the place itself as well as he could. So it was dark when we dismounted in the paved yard of the farmhouse, and your old fellow servant, Joseph, issued out to receive us by the light of a dip candle. He did it with the courtesy that redounded to his credit. His first act was to elevate his torch to a level with my face, squint malignantly, project his underlip, and turn away. Then he took the 2 horses and led them into the stables, reappearing for the purpose of locking the outer gate, as if we lived in an ancient castle. Heathcliff stayed to speak to him, and I entered the kitchen, a dingy, untidy hole. I dare say you would not know it, it is so changed since it was in your charge. By the fire stood a ruffianly child, strong in limb and dirty in garb, with a look of Catherine in his eyes and about his mouth. This is Edgar's legal nephew, I reflected. Mine in a manner. I must shake hands, and, yes, I must kiss him. It is right to establish a good understanding at the beginning. I approached, and, attempting to take his chubby fist, said, "How do you do, my dear?" He replied in a jargon I did not comprehend. "Shall you and I be friends, Hareton?" was my next essay at conversation. An oath and a threat to set Throttler on me if I did not frame off rewarded my perseverance. "Hey, Throttler, lad," whispered the little wretch, rousing a half-bred bulldog from its lair in a corner. "Now, wilt ta be ganging?" he asked authoritatively. Love for my life urged a compliance. I stepped over the threshold to wait till the others should enter. Mr. Heathcliff was nowhere visible, and Joseph, whom I followed to the stables and requested to accompany me in, after staring and muttering to himself, screwed up his nose and replied, "Mim, mim, mim. Did iver Christian body hear out like it? Minching and munching. How can I tell what you say?" "I say, I wish you to come with me into the house," I cried, thinking him deaf, yet highly disgusted at his rudeness. "Nor na me. Ah gettin' summat else to do," he answered, and continued his work, moving his lantern jaws meanwhile and surveying my dress and countenance, the former a great deal too fine, but the latter, I'm sure, as sad as he could desire, with sovereign contempt. I walked round the yard and through a wicket to another door, at which I took the liberty of knocking, in hopes some more civil servant might show himself. After a short suspense, it was opened by a tall, gaunt man, without neckerchief, and otherwise extremely slovenly. His features were lost in masses of shaggy hair that hung on his shoulders, and his eyes, too, were like a ghostly Catherine's, with all their beauty annihilated. "What's your business here?" he demanded grimly. "Who are you?" "My name was Isabella Linton," I replied. "You've seen me before, sir. I'm lately married to Mr. Heathcliff, and he has brought me here, I suppose by your permission." "Is he come back, then?" asked the hermit, glaring like a hungry wolf. "Yes, we came just now," I said, "but he left me by the kitchen door, and when I would have gone in, your little boy played sentinel over the place and frightened me off by the help of a bulldog." "It's well the hellish villain has kept his word," growled my future host, searching the darkness beyond me in expectation of discovering Heathcliff, and then he indulged in a soliloquy of execrations and threats of what he would have done had the fiend deceived him. I repented having tried this second entrance and was almost inclined to slip away before he finished cursing. But ere I could execute that intention, he ordered me in and shut and refastened the door. There was a great fire, and there was all the light in the huge apartment, whose floor had grown a uniform gray. And the once brilliant pewter dishes, which used to attract my gaze when I was a girl, partook of a similar obscurity created by tarnish and dust. I inquired whether I might call the maid and be conducted to a bedroom. Mr. Earnshaw vouchsafed no answer. He walked up and down with his hands in his pockets, apparently quite forgetting my presence, and his abstraction was evidently so deep and his whole aspect so misanthropical that I shrank from disturbing him again. You'll not be surprised, Ellen, at my feeling particularly cheerless, seated in worse than solitude on that inhospitable hearth, and remembering that 4 miles distant lay my delightful home, containing the only people I loved on earth, and there might as well be the Atlantic to part us, instead of those 4 miles. I could not overpass them. I questioned with myself, where must I turn for comfort? And mind you, don't tell Edgar or Catherine. Above every sorrow beside, this rose preeminent. Despair at finding nobody who could or would be my ally against Heathcliff. I had sought shelter at Wuthering Heights almost gladly, because I was secured by that arrangement from living alone with him. But he knew the people we were coming amongst, and he did not fear their intermeddling. I sat and thought a doleful time. The clock struck 8 and 9, and still my companion paced to and fro, his head bent on his breast and perfectly silent, unless a groan or a bitter ejaculation forced itself out at intervals. I listened to detect a woman's voice in the house, and filled the interim with wild regrets and dismal anticipations, which at last spoke audibly in irrepressible sighing and weeping. I was not aware how openly I grieved, till Earnshaw halted opposite in his measured walk, and gave me a stare of newly awakened surprise. Taking advantage of his recovered attention, I exclaimed, "I'm tired with my journey, and I want to go to bed. Where is the maid-servant? Direct me to her, as she won't come to me." "We have none," he answered. "You must wait on yourself." "Where must I sleep, then?" I sobbed. I was beyond regarding self-respect, weighed down by fatigue and wretchedness. "Joseph will show you to Heathcliff's chamber," said he. "Open that door. He's in there." I was going to obey, but he suddenly arrested me and added in the strangest tone, "Be so good as to turn your lock and draw your bolt. Don't omit it." "Well," I said, "but why, Mr. Earnshaw?" I did not relish the notion of deliberately fastening myself in with Heathcliff. "Look here," he replied, pulling from his waistcoat a curiously constructed pistol, having a double-edged spring knife attached to the barrel. "There's a great tempter to a desperate man, is it not? I cannot resist going up with this every night and trying his door. If once I find it open, he's done for. I do it invariably, even though the minute before I have been recalling 100 reasons that should make me refrain. It is some devil that urges me to thwart my own schemes by killing him. You fight against that devil for love as long as you may. When the time comes, not all the angels in heaven shall save him." I surveyed the weapon inquisitively. A hideous notion struck me. How powerful I should be possessing such an instrument. I took it from his hand and touched the blade. He looked astonished at the expression my face assumed during a brief second. It was not horror, it was covetousness. He snatched the pistol back jealously, shut the knife, and returned it to its concealment. "I don't care if you tell him," said he. "Put him on his guard and watch for him. You know the terms we are on, I see. His danger does not shock you." "What has Heathcliff done to you?" I asked. "In what has he wronged you to warrant this appalling hatred? Wouldn't it be wiser to bid him quit the house?" "No," thundered Earnshaw. "Should he offer to leave me, he's a dead man. Persuade him to attempt it, and you are a murderess. Am I to lose all without a chance of retrieval? Is Hareton to be a beggar? Oh, damnation. I will have it back, and I'll have his gold too, and then his blood, and hell shall have his soul. It will be 10 times blacker with that guest than ever it was before. You've acquainted me, Ellen, with your old master's habits. He is clearly on the verge of madness. He was so last night, at least. I shuddered to be near him, and thought on the servant's ill-bred moroseness as comparatively agreeable. He now recommenced his moody walk, and I raised the latch and escaped into the kitchen. Joseph was bending over the fire, peering into a large pan that swung above it, and a wooden bowl of oatmeal stood on the settle close by. The contents of the pan began to boil, and he turned to plunge his hand into the bowl. I conjectured that this preparation was probably for our supper, and being hungry, I resolved it should be eatable too. So crying out sharply, "I'll make the porridge," I removed the vessel out of his reach and proceeded to take off my hat and riding habit. "Mr. Earnshaw," I continued, "directs me to wait on myself. I will. I'm not going to act the lady among you, for fear I should starve." "Good Lord," he muttered, sitting down and stroking his ribbed stockings from the knee to the ankle. "If they's to be fresh ortherings, just when I'm getting used to 2 meisters, if I mun have a mistress set o'er my head, it's loike time to be flitting. I never did think to say to die, at I mud lave to old place, but a dot it's nigh at hand." This lamentation drew no notice from me. I went briskly to work, sighing to remember a period when it would have been all merry fun, but compelled speedily to drive off the remembrance. It racked me to recall past happiness, and the greater peril there was of conjuring up its apparition. The quicker the thibble ran round, and the faster the handfuls of meal fell into the water. Joseph beheld my style of cookery with growing indignation. "There," he ejaculated. "Hareton, thou willet sup thy porridge to neat? They'll be nowt but lumps as big as my knave. There again, I'd fling in bowl and all if I were you. There, pile to gilp up. Off then y'all head down with it. Bang, bang, it's a mercy to bottom isn't daved out." It was rather a rough mess, I own, when poured into the basins. 4 had been provided, and a gallon pitcher of new milk was brought from the dairy, which Hareton seized and commenced drinking and spilling from the expansive lip. I expostulated and desired that he should have his in a mug, affirming that I could not taste the liquid treated so dirtily. The old cynic chose to be vastly offended at this nicety, assuring me repeatedly that the barn was every bit as good as I, and every bit as wholesome, and wondering how I could fashion to be so conceited. Meanwhile, the infant ruffian continued sucking and glowered up at me defyingly as he slavered into the jug. "I shall have my supper in another room," I said. "Have you no place you call a parlor?" "Parlor?" he echoed sneeringly. "Parlor? Nay, we've no parlors. If you dunnot like we're company, they's maisters. And if you dunnot like meister, there's us." "Then I shall go upstairs," I answered. "Show me a chamber." I put my basin on a tray and went myself to fetch some more milk. With great grumblings, the fellow rose and preceded me in my ascent. We mounted to the garrets, he opening a door now and then to look into the apartments we passed. "Here's a rum," he said at last, flinging back a cranky board on hinges. "It's really not to eat a few porridge in. There's a pack of corn into corner. There, materly clean. If you're feared o' mucking your grand silk clothes, spread your handkerchief atop it." The rum was a kind of lumber hole smelling strong of malt and grain, various sacks of which articles were piled around, leaving a wide bare space in the middle. "Why, man," I exclaimed, facing him angrily, "this is not a place to sleep in. I wish to see my bedroom." "Bedroom," he repeated in a tone of mockery. "Ya see all to bedrooms there is. Yon's mine." He pointed into the second garret, only differing from the first in being more naked about the walls and having a large, low, curtainless bed with an indigo-colored quilt at one end. "What do I want with yours?" I retorted. "I suppose Mr. Heathcliff does not lodge at the top of the house, does he?" "Oh, it's Meister Heathcliff's you're wanting," cried he, as if making a new discovery. "Couldn't ye ha' said so at onst? On then, I mud ha' telled ye, but all this work. That's just one you cannot say. He always keeps it locked, and nobody ever mells on't but himself." "You've a nice house, Joseph," I could not refrain from observing, "and pleasant inmates, and I think the concentrated essence of all the madness in the world took up its abode in my brain the day I linked my fate with theirs. However, that is not to the present purpose. There are other rooms. For heaven's sake, be quick and let me settle somewhere." He made no reply to this adjuration, only plodding doggedly down the wooden steps and halting before an apartment which, from that halt and the superior quality of the furniture, I conjectured to be the best one. There was a carpet, a good one, but the pattern was obliterated by dust. A fireplace hung with cut paper, dropping to pieces. A handsome oak bedstead with ample crimson curtains of rather expensive material and modern make, but they had evidently experienced rough usage. The valances hung in festoons, wrenched from their rings, and the iron rod supporting them was bent in an arc on one side, causing the drapery to trail upon the floor. The chairs were also damaged, many of them severely, and deep indentations deformed the panels of the walls. I was endeavoring to gather resolution for entering and taking possession when my fool of a guide announced, "This here is to my sirs. My supper by this time was cold, my appetite gone, and my patience exhausted." I insisted on being provided instantly with a place of refuge and means of repose. "Where the divil," began the religious elder, "the Lord bless us, the Lord forgive us, where the hell would ye going? Ye marred, where's some nout? Ye seen all but Hareton's bit of a chamber. There's not another hole to lig down in the house." I was so vexed, I flung my tray and its contents on the ground, and then seated myself at the stairs head, hid my face in my hands, and cried. "Ich, exclaimed Joseph. "Well done, Miss Cathy. Well done, Miss Cathy. Howsever, to master sall just tumble over them broken pots, and them we's hear summit. We's hear how it's to be. Good for not maddling. Ye deserve pining for this to Christmas, flinging to precious gifts of God underfoot, and your flaysome rages. Bud, I'm mistaken, and ye shew your spirit long. Will Heathcliff bide such bonny ways, think ye? I nobbut wish he ma cotch ye that plisky. I nobbut wish he may." And so he went scolding to his den beneath, taking the candle with him, and I remained in the dark. The period of reflection succeeding this silly action compelled me to admit the necessity of smothering my pride and choking my wrath, and bestirring myself to remove its effects. An unexpected aid presently appeared in the shape of Throttler, whom I now recognized as a son of our old skulker. It had spent its whelphood at the Grange, and was given by my father to Mr. Hindley. I fancy it knew me. It pushed its nose against mine by way of salute, and then hastened to devour the porridge, while I groped from step to step, collecting the shattered earthenware and drying the spatters of milk from the banister with my pocket handkerchief. Our labors were scarcely over when I heard Earnshaw's tread in the passage. My assistant tucked in his tail and pressed to the wall. I stole into the nearest doorway. The dog's endeavor to avoid him was unsuccessful, as I guessed by a scutter downstairs and a prolonged, piteous yelping. I had better luck. He passed on, entered his chamber, and shut the door. Directly after, Joseph came up with Hareton to put him to bed. I had found shelter in Hareton's room, and the old man, on seeing me, said, "There's rum for both ya, and your pride, now, I sud think i' the house. It's empty. Ye mun have it all to yourseln, and him as allays makes a third is such ill company." Gladly did I take advantage of this intimation, and the minute I flung myself into the chair by the fire, I nodded and slept. My slumber was deep and sweet, though over far too soon. Mr. Heathcliff awoke me. He had just come in and demanded, in his loving manner, what I was doing there. I told him the cause of my staying up so late, that he had the key of our room in his pocket. The adjective our gave mortal offense. He swore it was not, nor ever should be mine, and but I'll not repeat his language nor describe his habitual conduct. He is ingenious and unresting in seeking to gain my abhorrence. I sometimes wonder at him with an intensity that deadens my fear. Yet, I assure you, a tiger or a venomous serpent could not rouse terror in me equal to that which he wakens. He told me of Catherine's illness and accused my brother of causing it, promising that I should be Edgar's proxy in suffering till he could get hold of him. I do hate him. I am wretched. I have been a fool. Beware of uttering one breath of this to anyone at the Grange. I shall expect you every day. Don't disappoint me. Isabella. And now, chapter 14 of Wuthering Heights. As soon as I had perused this epistle, I went to the master and informed him that his sister had arrived at the Heights and sent me a letter expressing her sorrow for Mrs. Linton's situation and her ardent desire to see him, with the wish that he would transmit to her, as early as possible, some token of forgiveness by me. Forgiveness, said Linton. I have nothing to forgive her, Ellen. You may call at Wuthering Heights this afternoon, if you like, and say that I am not angry, but I'm sorry to have lost her, especially as I can never think she'll be happy. It is out of the question my going to see her, however. We are eternally divided, and should she really wish to oblige me, let her persuade the villain she has married to leave the country. And you won't write her a little note, sir? I asked imploringly. No, he answered. It is needless. My communication with Heathcliff's family shall be as sparing as his with mine. It shall not exist. Mr. Edgar's coldness depressed me exceedingly, and all the way from the Grange I puzzled my brains how to put more heart into what he said when I repeated it, and how to soften his refusal of even a few lines to console Isabella. I dare say she had been on the watch for me since morning. I saw her looking through the lattice as I came up the garden causeway, and I nodded to her, but she drew back, as if afraid of being observed. I entered without knocking. There never was such a dreary, dismal scene as the formerly cheerful house presented. I must confess that if I had been in the young lady's place, I would at least have swept the hearth and wiped the tables with a duster, but she already partook of the pervading spirit of neglect which encompassed her. Her pretty face was wan and listless, her hair uncurled, some locks hanging lankly down and some carelessly twisted round her head. Probably she had not touched her dress since yester evening. Hindley was not there. Mr. Heathcliff sat at a table, turning over some papers in his pocket-book, but he rose when I appeared, asked me how I did, quite friendly, and offered me a chair. He was the only thing there that seemed decent, and I thought he never looked better. So much had circumstances altered their positions that he would certainly have struck a stranger as a born and bred gentleman, and his wife as a thorough little slattern. She came forward eagerly to greet me and held out one hand to take the expected letter. I shook my head. She wouldn't understand the hint, but followed me to a sideboard where I went to lay my bonnet, and importuned me in a whisper to give her directly what I had brought. Heathcliff guessed the meaning of her maneuvers and said, "If you have got anything for Isabella, as no doubt you have, Nellie, give it to her. You needn't make a secret of it. We have no secrets between us." "Oh, I have nothing," I replied, thinking it best to speak the truth at once. "My master bid me tell his sister that she must not expect either a letter or a visit from him at present. He sends his love, ma'am, and his wishes for your happiness, and his pardon for the grief you have occasioned. But he thinks that after this time, his household and the household here should drop intercommunication, as nothing good could come of keeping it up." Mrs. Heathcliff's lip quivered slightly, and she returned to her seat at the window. Her husband took his stand on the hearthstone, near me, and began to put questions concerning Catherine. I told him as much as I thought proper of her illness, and he extorted from me, by cross-examination, most of the facts connected with its origin. I blamed her, as she deserved, for bringing it all on herself, and ended by hoping that he would follow Mr. Linton's example and avoid future interference with his family, for good or evil. Mrs. Linton is just now recovering, I said. She'll never be like she was, but her life is spared, and if you really have a regard for her, you'll shun crossing her way again. Nay, you'll move out of this country entirely, and that you may not regret it, I'll inform you Catherine Linton is as different now from your old friend Catherine Earnshaw as that young lady is different from me. Her appearance has changed greatly, her character much more so, and the person who is compelled of necessity to be her companion will only sustain his affection hereafter by the remembrance of what she once was, by common humanity and a sense of duty. That is quite possible, remarked Heathcliff, forcing himself to seem calm. Quite possible that your master should have nothing but common humanity and a sense of duty to fall back upon. But do you imagine that I shall leave Catherine to his duty and humanity? And can you compare my feelings respecting Catherine to his? Before you leave this house, I must exact a promise from you that you'll get me an interview with her. Consent or refuse, I will see her. What do you say? I say, Mr. Heathcliff, I replied, you must not. You never shall through my means. Another encounter between you and the master would kill her altogether. With your aid, that may be avoided, he continued, and should there be danger of such an event, should he be the cause of adding a single trouble more to her existence, why, I think I shall be justified in going to extremes. I wish you had sincerity enough to tell me whether Catherine would suffer greatly from his loss. The fear that she would restrains me. And there you see the distinction between our feelings. Had he been in my place and I in his, though I hated him with a hatred that turned my life to gall, I never would have raised a hand against him. You may look incredulous if you please. I never would have banished him from her society as long as she desired his. The moment her regard ceased, I would have torn his heart out and drank his blood. But till then, if you don't believe me, you don't know me. Till then, I would have died by inches before I touched a single hair of his head. And yet, I interrupted, you have no scruples in completely ruining all hopes of her perfect restoration by thrusting yourself into her remembrance now, when she has nearly forgotten you, and involving her in a new tumult of discord and distress. You suppose she has nearly forgotten me, he said. Oh, Nelly, you know she is not. You know as well as I do that for every thought she spends on Linton, she spends 1,000 on me. At a most miserable period of my life, I had a notion of the kind. It haunted me on my return to the neighborhood last summer, but only her own assurance could make me admit the horrible idea again. And then, Linton would be nothing, nor Hindley, nor all the dreams that ever I dreamt. 2 words would comprehend my future: death and hell. Existence after losing her would be hell. Yet I was a fool to fancy for a moment that she valued Edgar Linton's attachment more than mine. If he loved with all the powers of his puny being, he couldn't love as much in 80 years as I could in a day. And Catherine has a heart as deep as I have. The sea could be as readily contained in that horse trough as her whole affection could be monopolized by him. Tush! He is scarcely a degree dearer to her than her dog or her horse. It is not in him to be loved like me. How can she love in him what he has not? Catherine and Edgar are as fond of each other as any 2 people can be, cried Isabella with sudden vivacity. No one has a right to talk in that manner, and I won't hear my brother depreciated in silence. Your brother is wondrous fond of you, too, isn't he? Observed Heathcliff scornfully. He turns you adrift on the world with surprising alacrity. He is not aware of what I suffer, she replied. I didn't tell him that. You have been telling him something, then. You have written, have you? To say that I was married. I did write. You saw the note. And nothing since? No. My young lady is looking sadly the worse for her change of condition, I remarked. Somebody's love comes short in her case, obviously. Whose, I may guess, but perhaps I shouldn't say." "I should guess it was her own," said Heathcliff. "She degenerates into a mere slut. She is tired of trying to please me, uncommonly early. You'd hardly credit it, but the very morrow of our wedding she was weeping to go home. However, she'll suit this house so much the better for not being over nice, and I'll take care she does not disgrace me by rambling abroad." "Well, sir," returned I hope you'll consider that Mrs. Heathcliff is accustomed to be looked after and waited on, and that she has been brought up like an only daughter, whom everyone was ready to serve. You must let her have a maid to keep things tidy about her, and you must treat her kindly. Whatever be your notion of Mr. Edgar, you cannot doubt that she has a capacity for strong attachments, or she wouldn't have abandoned the elegancies and comforts and friends of her former house to fix contentedly in such a wilderness as this with you. "She abandoned them under a delusion," he answered, "picturing in me a hero of romance and expecting unlimited indulgences from my chivalrous devotion. I can hardly regard her in the light of a rational creature, so obstinately has she persisted in forming a fabulous notion of my character and acting on the false impressions she cherished. But at last I think she begins to know me. I don't perceive the silly smiles and grimaces that provoked me at first, and the senseless incapability of discerning that I was in earnest when I gave her my opinion of her infatuation and herself. It was a marvelous effort of perspicacity to discover that I did not love her. I believed at one time no lessons could teach her that. And yet it is poorly learnt, for this morning she announced, as a piece of appalling intelligence, that I had actually succeeded in making her hate me. A positive labor of Hercules, I assure you. If it be achieved, I have cause to return thanks. Can I trust your assertion, Isabella? Are you sure you hate me? If I let you alone for half a day, won't you come sighing and wheedling to see me again? I dare say she would rather I had seemed all tenderness before you. It wounds her vanity to have the truth exposed, but I don't care who knows that the passion was wholly on one side, and I never told her a lie about it. She cannot accuse me of showing a bit of deceitful softness. The first thing she saw me do on coming out of the Grange was to hang up her little dog, and when she pleaded for it, the first words I uttered were a wish that I had the hanging of every being belonging to her, except one. Possibly she took that exception for herself, but no brutality disgusted her. I suppose she has an innate admiration of it, if only her precious person were secure from injury. Now, was it not the depth of absurdity and genuine idiocy for that pitiful, slavish, mean-minded Brock to dream that I could love her? Tell your master, Nellie, that I never, in all my life, met with such an abject thing as she is. She even disgraces the name of Linton, and I've sometimes relented from pure lack of invention in my experiments on what she could endure, and still creep shamefully cringing back. But tell him also to set his fraternal and magisterial heart at ease, that I keep strictly within the limits of the law. I have avoided, up to this period, giving her the slightest right to claim a separation, and what's more, she'll thank nobody for dividing us. If she desired to go, she might. The nuisance of her presence outweighs the gratification to be derived from tormenting her. Mr. Heathcliff, said I, this is the talk of a madman, and your wife, most likely, is convinced you are mad, and for that reason she has borne with you hitherto. But now that you say that she may go, she'll doubtless avail herself of the permission. You are not so bewitched, ma'am, are you, as to remain with him of your own accord? Take care, Ellen, answered Isabella, her eyes sparkling irefully. There was no misdoubting by their expression the full success of her partner's endeavors to make himself detested. Don't put faith in a single word he says. He's a lying fiend, a monster, and not a human being. I've been told I might leave him before, and I've made the attempt, but I dare not repeat it. Only, Ellen, promise you'll not mention a syllable of his infamous conversation to my brother or to Catherine. Whatever he may pretend, he wishes to provoke Edgar to desperation. He says he has married me on purpose to obtain power over him, and he shan't obtain it. I'll die first. I just hope, I pray, that he may forget his diabolical prudence and kill me. The single pleasure I can imagine is to die or to see him dead." "There, that will do for the present," said Heathcliff. "If you are called upon in a court of law, you'll remember her language, Nelly. And take a good look at that countenance. She's near the point which would suit me. No, you're not fit to be your own guardian, Isabella, now, and I, being your legal protector, must retain you in my custody, however distasteful the obligation may be. Go upstairs. I have something to say to Ellen Dean in private." "That's not the way. Upstairs, I tell you. Why, this is the road upstairs, child." He seized and thrust her from the room, and returned muttering, "I have no pity. I have no pity. The more the worms writhe, the more I yearn to crush out their entrails. It is a moral teething, and I grind with greater energy in proportion to the increase of pain." "Do you understand what the word pity means?" I said, hastening to resume my bonnet. "Did you ever feel a touch of it in your life?" "Put that down," he interrupted, perceiving my intention to depart. "You are not going yet. Come here now, Nelly. I must either persuade or compel you to aid me in fulfilling my determination to see Catherine, and that without delay. I swear that I meditate no harm. I don't desire to cause any disturbance or to exasperate or insult Mr. Linton. I only wish to hear from herself how she is and why she has been ill, and to ask if anything that I could do would be of use to her. Last night I was in the Grange garden 6 hours, and I'll return there tonight, and every night I'll haunt the place, and every day, till I find an opportunity of entering. If Edgar Linton meets me, I shall not hesitate to knock him down and give him enough to ensure his quiescence while I stay. If his servants oppose me, I shall threaten them off with these pistols. But wouldn't it be better to prevent my coming in contact with them or their master? And you could do it so easily. I'd warn you when I came, and then you might let me in unobserved as soon as she was alone, and watch till I departed, your conscience quite calm. You would be hindering mischief." I protested against playing that treacherous part in my employer's house, and besides, I urged the cruelty and selfishness of his destroying Mrs. Linton's tranquility for his satisfaction. "The commonest occurrence startles her painfully," I said. "She's all nerves, and she couldn't bear the surprise, I'm positive. Don't persist, sir, or else I shall be obliged to inform my master of your designs, and he'll take measures to secure his house and its inmates from any such unwarrantable intrusions." "In that case, I'll take measures to secure you, woman," exclaimed Heathcliff. "You shall not leave Wuthering Heights till tomorrow morning. It is a foolish story to assert that Catherine could not bear to see me, and as to surprising her, I don't desire it. You must prepare her. Ask her if I may come. You say she never mentions my name and that I am never mentioned to her. To whom should she mention me if I am a forbidden topic in the house? She thinks you are all spies for her husband. Oh, I've no doubt she's in hell among you. I guess by her silence as much as anything what she feels. You say she's often restless and anxious-looking. Is that a proof of tranquility? You talk of her mind being unsettled. How the devil could it be otherwise in her frightful isolation? And that insipid, paltry creature attending her from duty and humanity, from pity and charity. He may as well plant an oak in a flower pot and expect it to thrive, as imagine he can restore her to vigor in the soil of his shallow cares. Let us settle it at once. Will you stay here, and am I to fight my way to Catherine over Linton and his footman? Or will you be my friend, as you have been hitherto, and do what I request? Decide, because there is no reason for my lingering another minute if you persist in your stubborn ill nature. Well, Mr. Lockwood, I argued and complained and flatly refused him 50 times. But in the long run, he forced me to an agreement. I engaged to carry a letter from him to my mistress, and should she consent, I promised to let him have intelligence of Linton's next absence from home when he might come, and get in as he was able. I wouldn't be there, and my fellow servants should be equally out of the way. Was it right or wrong? I fear it was wrong, though expedient. I thought I prevented another explosion by my compliance, and I thought, too, it might create a favorable crisis in Catherine's mental illness. And then I remembered Mr. Edgar's stern rebuke of my carrying tales, and I tried to smooth away all disquietude on the subject by affirming, with frequent iteration, that betrayal of trust, if it merited so harsh an appellation, should be the last. Notwithstanding, my journey homeward was sadder than my journey thither, and many misgivings I had ere I could prevail on myself to put the missive into Mrs. Linton's hand. But here is Kenneth. I'll go down and tell him how much better you are. My history is dree, as we say, and will serve to while away another morning. Dree and dreary, I reflected as the good woman descended to receive the doctor, and not exactly of a kind which I should have chosen to amuse me. But never mind, I'll extract wholesome medicines from Mrs. Dean's bitter herbs, and firstly, let me beware of the fascination that lurks in Catherine Heathcliff's brilliant eyes. I should be in a curious taking if I surrendered my heart to that young person, and the daughter turned out a second edition of the mother. That concludes chapters 13 and 14 of Wuthering Heights. The plot is thickening. We'll find out next week what happens. Will Catherine and Heathcliff see each other again? They are like irresistible things to each other. I suspect they will. And if so, what do you think is going to come of it? Can anything good come of it, or only more bad? Can this book be unrelentingly only bad things, or can good moments happen? If you've not read it before, I'd love to hear your conjectures, whether you think things actually will get better, or will things stay bad for these folks. We'll continue next week with more of Wuthering Heights by Emily Brontë, and thank you so much. It has been such a fun week of reading. Bye!